Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I am wrapping up 2019 and thinking about 2020. So in this video I'm going to talk about my statistics for reading in my channel in 2019, talk about the goals that I had set and if I met them, also reflect a little bit about how 2019 went, and then talk about what I would like to do, what my goals and plans are for 2020. So let's get started with the statistics. In 2019, I read 169 books, which amounted to about 40,000 pages. I averaged about 233 pages per book. The breakdown of per month reading meant that I read about 14 books on average each month, with my lowest months at 9 books in February and June, and my highest month in July with 22 books. Even so, 14 books a month is actually quite a lot for me, although I did read, somewhat shorter books this year, so that makes more sense. The breakdown in terms of pages is pretty similar to the number of books. My lowest month here is June, where I had just over 1,800 pages, and my highest month is July, where I had just over 5,000 pages. My average per month was just under 3,500. Next, taking a look at the size of the books that I read, I had a lot of short things this year. About half of the books that I read were under 200 pages. I did really love novellas as well as children's books this year, so that makes sense. But most of the other things that I read were between 200 and 400 pages, with a couple of longer things thrown in as well. The shortest books that I read were a number of picture books, which were 32 pages, and the longest thing that I read was a Wheel of Time book, unsurprisingly, at just over 1,000 pages. Next, looking at how happy I was with the reading that I did, I clearly was very happy. I had an average of 4.33 stars for the books that I read this year, and I think that's right. I loved what I read. I am not stingy with my 5 stars at all, clearly. I gave almost 40% of the books I read 5 stars, and the truth is that I loved them. I will link below a video that I did a while back talking about the way that I rate my books, but basically for me, 5 stars means I was thoroughly engaged in the book and nothing about that book brought me out of the story. So I know some other people have different kind of meanings of 5 stars, things like, oh, this is a timeless classic or something like that. But for me, it just means I thoroughly enjoyed the reading experience, and so many books did that this year. And actually, if you look at my chart, there are very few things that I rated below 4 stars. Part of that, however, is because I do DNF pretty liberally. I think I DNF'd something around like 1 to 2 books a month, and I feel, no problems with that. I just DNF things if it's not appealing to me. However, I did have a number of things, about 20%, which were lower than 4 stars, a couple of 3.5, 3 and 2.5, and 1 2-star read. I will leave that to you to figure out which book that was. Now moving on to a look at the breakdown of what kinds of books I read. So I thought, man, I read a lot of books this year. 169 is vastly more than I've read in any previous year, but I also knew that I'd read a lot of graphic works. So I wanted to see how the numbers broke down, looking at graphic versus just textual books. And actually, it's fine. I read about 30% graphic books, but I still read over 100 textual books. Looking at the page count, actually the graphic books accounted for even less. They were only 20% of my reading, because a lot of the things that I read were children's picture books and they were like 30 pages long, which meant that I read over 30,000 pages in the textual books. So that was still pretty significant. Next, looking at the format of the books that I read, most of the books that I read were novels. That was, the vast majority. But I read a lot of novellas this year, which I really enjoyed, and a lot of collections, poetry collections and short story collections and essay collections, and I really, really enjoyed those. I also read quite a bit of graphic works, which are in here, and the lowest category is illustrated work, which was basically, I didn't know what else to title it. I read The Electric State by Simon Stalenhag, which is basically a short story which has full-page paintings that illustrate the story, and it really isn't kind of a picture book or something else. It's its own thing, so that's my lowest category. Looking at age category, the vast majority of what I read here was adult. I really like adult writing. I like the stories. I like the complexity. However, I did read still a chunk of YA and middle grade. I really liked middle grade this year, and even some children's books. That was kind of new for me, but I found I'm a fan. Next, looking at genre, I've read quite a few different fiction genres, but again, there was a clear favorite. Fantasy is my go-to, and the majority of what I read was fantasy. Now, I did lump a lot of things into fantasy, things like steampunk I lumped into fantasy, and urban fantasy, and magical realism, and all these sorts of things, but really, they're fantasy. So I bundled it all together. I did read a lot of science fiction this year, as well as a lot of contemporary, and then there were a couple of other genres that I dabbled briefly in with a book or two. Sush took a look at this, and he was wondering, why do you have two horror books? Horror is not my favorite genre at all. Those were both Coraline. So I read Coraline this year by Neil Gaiman, and then I read a Spanish language graphic novel adaptation of it. So both of these were middle grade horror, which maybe is a little bit more my pace. In terms of nonfiction genres, I again had clear favorites. Almost everything that I read was either a memoir or a biography. I do actually like a lot of other types of fiction, but those are the ones that maybe I gravitate towards a lot. So next year I'll try to expand that and read some other genres within nonfiction, but I still had a lot of fun with the nonfiction that I read this year. Now moving on to a couple channel statistics. I made 117 videos in 2019, which averaged to just over 2 videos a week, which is pretty perfect. That was my goal for 2019, was to make 2 videos a week, and then every once in a while I'd have something else I wanted to make, something extra to say, so I'd pop in another video. So I'm really happy with that. In terms of my monthly priorities, I think I did fairly well as well. Most of the time, I read about 5 or 6 of the books that I put on my TBR for the month, plus a few extras that I ended up picking up that fit within that theme. My least successful month, if you have seen my videos, was unsurprisingly November, where I only read 2 of the books that were on my TBR, plus a couple of other things. But most of the months I did pretty well in reading things off of my TBR, and often I found a couple of other books to add in. So I'm pretty happy with how that turned out, and I have a better idea of kind of what my reading pace is for my monthly priorities now. So those were the statistics that I tracked for 2019. If anybody has any suggestions for other statistics that are good to track, please let me know in the comments below. I find that if I start the year with tracking it, I can do okay, but it's very hard to add it in afterwards. And when I track things, I tend to pay attention to them. So I'd love to hear any recommendations that you have. Now moving on to the reading goals that I had for 2019. In 2019, I had a number of goals, the main goals of which were to read at least 75 books and at least 30,000 pages. So I did pretty well on these. For the 75 books, I definitely met this goal. I read 169. For the 30,000 pages, again, I met this goal. I actually read closer to 40,000 pages. Then I had a number of sub-goals. The first sub-goal was to read at least 25 nonfiction books, and I met this goal. I read 26, although a couple of these were picture books, but you know what? They were still nonfiction, so it counts. The next goal was to read at least 10 non-English books, and this one, unfortunately, I did not do so well. I only read 5 of my non-English books. So definitely this is something for me to work on, and I will talk more about that later when I talk about my 2020 plans. Next was to read at least 10 poetry collections, and I did this. I read 17. So that's more poetry than I think I've ever read in a year before, and I really loved it. I especially found that I loved reading political poetry and novels in verse. Both of those really worked for me. The next goal is to read at least 10 short story or essay collections. And again, I did this. I read 18. And I found that I loved them. I really, really loved them. I had discovered last year that I was finding I actually kind of liked short stories and essay collections. So I made it a goal this year, and I just fell in love with it. I want to read so many more. This is definitely a favorite new kind of reading for me to do. The remaining sub goals that I had were percentage-based ones because I wanted to make sure that I was getting the diversity in my reading that I was looking for. So the first was to read at least 60% women, and I met this goal. I read over 65% women, so that was awesome. The next sub goal was to read at least 60% authors of color, and I almost made this goal. I read 59%, so very, very close and pretty close to on target, but I'd like to get it just a little higher next year. The last sub goal was to read at least 25% queer authors, and again, I was very close. I came in at 24%. So those are both goals that I'm really happy with, but I definitely will have to just push a little bit extra, just 1 or 2 extra books, and I would have met those goals. Now I'd like to reflect a little bit on how my 2019 reading year went, both in terms of the reading itself as well as in how my year on BookTube went. So first, talking about my reading, I actually had anticipated that my reading might decrease a little bit in 2019 compared to 2018 when I read about 100 books. Because 1, 100 books was actually still quite a lot for me, and then 2, I thought, if I'm starting a BookTube channel, I'm gonna have to divide my free time between reading and making videos. However, it turned out to be sort of the opposite, where instead of dividing my time between reading and making videos, I just made a lot more time for these things, and many other things like watching Netflix and such just kind of fell by the wayside. I wasn't as interested in doing them. A lot of my free time now is devoted just to reading and BookTube, and especially because it's something that I do as a shared activity with my husband, Sush, it ends up being a lot of real quality time for us. So I've just gotten more into reading this year. It has been absolutely wonderful, and I read clearly 169 books is more than 100, so I read a lot more this year. Also, I really loved the quality of what I was reading this year. Just such good books. In general, last year as well, I had a very good reading year, but this year has just topped it. I've read so many great books, and I think it's really because of the influence of BookTube. Not only do I hear so many great recommendations from so many people, but I'm really inspired to challenge myself and to move beyond my comfort zone into reading things that I kind of want myself to read, but I don't necessarily pick up as easily. The monthly priorities have really helped with that. That's made a huge difference. And then also just subscribing to some of the channels that focus on things that are outside of my comfort zone. That's just been such a great experience, and I really appreciate everybody out there who is working hard on their own BookTube channels and is kind of pushing themselves and sharing the things that they read and that they come across, because it has led to me having just such a great reading year. And I also feel like because I have read so outside of my comfort zone and so many new authors, new perspectives, new genres, it has really widened my worldview, given me a lot more understanding and empathy for so many different people, so many different experiences. So I feel like as a person, I have also grown this year. Then talking about kind of how being on BookTube itself has been, it has just been fantastic. I really, really love the community aspect of BookTube. That has been a bit of a surprise. I'm not generally the sort of person who's looking for socializing in the community. I tend to be the sort of person who has like 1 or 2 friends, and I see those and then I'm done. I don't like, big groups of friends, except that on BookTube, like, I start to get it. It is so wonderful to have these connections with so many different people from all sorts of different backgrounds based on a shared interest. And I love being part of the community. I love hearing what other people have to say, hearing their differences and their similarities in terms of our opinions, hearing their perspectives, getting their insight into things that I, wouldn't have ever thought to view something that way. So all of that has been really enriching. The discussions that we have in the comments, everybody is so kind and so wonderful and has such great things to say and communicate with each other. So I love participating in in the discussions. And then also I've done a ton of buddy reads this year, and that's been so much fun. I have loved the buddy reads that I've done. So everybody who did a buddy read to me, thank you so much, because that was a really good experience, not only in prompting me to pick up a book that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise made time for, but also just getting that experience to kind of discuss as we go and hear your perspective. That was wonderful. The other thing that was really cool this year was getting to meet some booktubers in person. So Sush and I went to WorldCon, which was so exciting. And you know, when we decided to go, we didn't think we would know anybody, and we got invited to join in with a bunch of booktubers who were going to WorldCon. So thank you, Rachel at Kalanadi, for inviting us into the group. And it was just so much fun. Everybody was wonderful. I made a video of shout outs about all the booktubers that we met there, so I'll link that below. But just such great, wonderful people. And even now we're continuing to meet people. Recently we met Priscilla at Bookie Charm and her sister Yvette at Book Cave, because we were in their hometown, and I just messaged them and said, hey, you want to get coffee? And so we did, and they showed us to a really cool local bookstore as well. So it's so much fun being part of the community, getting to meet people, getting to learn about them, to hear their viewpoints. Absolutely loving that. And I'm loving that Sush and I are doing this together. He is not somebody who wants to create his own booktube channel. That would just stress him out. But he's totally into booktube. Some people may notice sometimes I'll comment like, we thought that your video was really great, because often Sush and I will watch videos together. He watches a ton of them with me. We discuss it all the time. He comes and he guest stars in some of my videos. So it's become a really fun shared activity for us as well. So thank you to everybody in the community for making this year just the best. Okay, so now moving on to 2020. My reading goals for 2020 are going to be very similar to this year because it was a great reading year. Again, I want to read at least 75 books. I'll be totally happy if I only read 75. This year, 169 was kind of crazy large. I'm totally fine with scaling that back if I tend to pick up longer books or things that just take a little bit longer to work through. But I think at least 75 is a good number for me. And I'd like to get, again, at least 30,000 pages. So those are my main goals. For my sub goals, I again would like to read at least 25 nonfiction books, and I would like to keep my non-English goal, but I'd actually like to up it just a little to 12 books in the year. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about my channel plans, because I've got an idea. In terms of the poetry and the short story and essay collections, I think I don't need to put that as a goal. I just now have discovered that I love those types of books, and I'm going to try to read more of them in general, but I don't need to have a specific number for them because that's already integrated now into my reading. In terms of percentages, I do want to keep the 60% female author ratio, 60% author of color ratio, and 25% queer author ratio. But I want to add in an additional 15% disabled author statistic, because I found this year, I did a month focusing on disabled reads as a monthly priority, and that made me really conscious that I don't necessarily pay attention to that. That's not something that I seek out, but I really would like to hear those voices. You can't always necessarily know about somebody's disability. Often it's a very private thing. They haven't shared it, or it's something very hidden. But I think that if I read a book that has on page really good representation of disability, regardless of if I know anything about the author having a disability, I'll include that as well. And many of these authors do talk about things about their private lives as well, and I might, with a little bit of research, be able to find more authors or understand more. Plus, I'll keep the disability part of my monthly priority, so I'll get some books in then. Now moving on to my channel plans for 2020. Many of the things I will keep the same. I still plan to make about 2 videos a week. Sometimes I might add in a third one. I found that in 2019, just doing 2 videos a week sometimes meant that I just didn't have room for some of the extra videos that I wanted to make. So I might add in a third one here and there, especially in January. There's going to be a third one most weeks because there's a lot to say. I have a lot of things that I want to do. I also am going to be keeping my weekly wrap-ups. This was something that I had toyed with the idea of switching to bi-monthly wrap-ups, and I really want to thank a bunch of people who kind of talked this out with me. Eva from Eva Strange kind of had made a comment about how she really liked the weekly wrap-ups, and that got me really thinking, you know, what do I want? So I talked about it with her a little bit, and with Paul from Weymouth, and with my cousin Jade from Bedtime Bookworm, as well as, of course, Sush. Sush got a lot of my, you know, pondering of what style do I want to do. But I decided that I want to keep the weekly wrap-up format because it is a really low-key way for me to check in about what I've been reading right as it's fresh in my mind, and it's very good content that I like to make. So I'm going to keep with that, but I'll just add in a couple of extra videos here and there that I was feeling I didn't have the room for before. Jade had a good suggestion, which was things like, if you want to film a standalone review, just film it as soon as you've read the book and fit it into your schedule later. So it doesn't have to be edited or posted right away. Just make sure you film it as soon as you've read the book, because that was what I found I was struggling with. I had read all these books that I wanted to do standalone reviews for, and I didn't have time. And then by the time I had time, I had forgotten almost everything I wanted to say. The other thing that I'll be continuing is the monthly priorities project. I'll have a separate video soon, kind of talking about my plans for that for the year. Most of it will be the same, but I have made a few tweaks to the specifics of how I'm going to work that out. And then I have some new projects, some new things that I want to do. So the first of which is that I do want to do more standalone book videos. So reviews, yes, but more so discussions and reflections. I found that when I want to talk about a book, in addition to what I've done in a weekly wrap-up, what I want to do is not necessarily review whether it's good or bad. I just want to talk about it. I want to discuss the thoughts that I had and the themes that it brought up and the ideas that it had to share, and I just want to talk more about it than is necessarily the way I do a wrap-up in a weekly video. So I want to do more of these. I also want to push myself to add closed captioning to at least my weekly wrap-ups. So closed captioning is something that is definitely an important accessibility issue, and there are a number of booktubers who are awesome about this, who add closed captionings to every video they make. Adriana at Perpetual Pages does this, Priscilla at Bookie Charm does this, Yvette at Book Cave does this, and Kazen at Always Doing does this. In fact, she did closed captioning for every video of Vlogmas. Priscilla and Yvette and I were talking about that and just so impressed by, you know, her work ethic and like getting that done. And I have been interested in adding closed captioning to my videos for a while. I do think it's an important thing to do, but I was a little intimidated by it. However, YouTube does add automatic captions to your videos. So as part of that processing, uploading process, it creates these automatic captions based on its kind of language model. And I took a look, it's actually fairly accurate for me. Whatever language model they use is pretty closely aligned with my speech patterns, and so it is pretty accurate. So I'm going to be trying to, at least for my weekly wrap-ups, consistently add closed captionings where you just go in, edit those automatic ones by, you know, adding punctuation, fixing words that it got wrong, that sort of thing. And then if I can, I'll do it for other ones as well. If anybody out there has suggestions for ways to be better at adding closed captioning, like if you have any tricks or tips or anything like that, please let me know in the comments below, because I'm new to it and I might not do such a great job at the beginning, but it will be a learning process. Hopefully by the end of 2020, I'll be so fluent in it and comfortable with it that from that point forward, I can just use closed captioning for all of my videos. But for now, one step at a time, I'm gonna start with my weekly wrap-ups. The other things that I wanted to add this year are a couple of new projects. And I hadn't originally been planning on these, but over Christmas, Jade and I were chatting, and she asked me what new things I was going to do in 2020, and I realized I didn't have any plans. So I thought, you know what, I can push myself a little bit. I can ask myself, where do I want to grow, and create some ideas for that. So the first of these, unsurprisingly, is that I would like to read more non-English books. So I'd like to give myself a non-English book project where for 2020 I read one book every month, so a total of 12, in a different language. The languages that I have books in are mainly Japanese, Spanish, and French, but I might have one or two in German as well. I'd like to read them, and then I would like to do a review in the language that I read it in. The review is definitely a very challenging part of this because I'm not that fluent in any of these languages. Japanese is okay, but even so I find that in front of the camera, I struggle a little bit with it, whereas, you know, in conversation I'm much better. So that's a challenge for me, but I feel like if I prioritize it, I can do it. So I will have a video out later this month talking more in depth about kind of what I'm going to be doing for that and what books I'm going to be reading and everything like that. The other project that I'd like to do as well is another place where I found I wasn't reading enough, which is social justice nonfiction. So I found that I read a ton of memoirs and biographies this year, but there's also a lot of much more academic, essay-based, kind of research-based books that I would really like to read about social justice. They are high on my interest level, but low on my actually picking up level. So I need to prioritize those. So I would like to similarly create a project where every month I read one social justice nonfiction and I create a video talking about that. Not necessarily a review, but probably more of a discussion of the topics covered in that. So again, I'll come up with a video later this month talking about that in more detail about kind of what social justice is and what I want out of the project. So those are my plans for 2020. I am really excited. I had such a great year in 2019 and I'm really looking forward to 2020. If you guys have videos up talking about what you're going to be up to, looking at 2019 and how it went, I'd love to hear about them. Maybe I've already seen them. A lot of people already have them up, but definitely tell me in the comments below so I can check yours out if I haven't already commented on it. And if you guys just have any general suggestions for me, by the way, I am very interested in hearing any recommendations or suggestions for what I can do to improve my channel. I've had a couple of people give me some suggestions that were really helpful. Things like Ian at Nur Chaos had suggested that I put up thumbnails of the books that I've read for each weekly wrap-up so that it made it a little easier to kind of go through and remember which ones he had already seen. And like, that was such a great idea. So if you guys have noticed anything or you have any suggestions for what I could do to make 2020 an even better year, go ahead and let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear it, and I wish you guys all the best for getting started on all of your exciting new ideas for 2020. I will have a video coming up soon talking about my favorite 2019 books too, so look out for that soon.